are talking to Stephen Ó Mathúna, Senior UX Researcher from Workday. Let's let some more people in. Quite a lot of people.
Cool. You're busy, David, eh?
I'm busy.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm gonna have to keep letting in a few people here. So. Okay. Okay. So. Okay, guys. I guess we'll start. So we're talking to Stephen, and so this is a ask him anything within reason, obviously. If you have an interest in research or any interest in product design or anything, you can ask away. So what you can do is text, chat your, type your question in to the chat box, and then we can ask him from there. So if anybody wants to start asking questions.
Hey David, do you want to monitor it, or will I keep an eye on the chat?
Yeah, we'll both do it. And Stephen, if you want to just introduce yourself.
Yeah, that's a good way to start. So, thanks, David. I'm Stephen. I may have introduced myself to some of you last year. I did a talk about this time last year, in fact. So some of you might be introducing myself to you for a second time. So I am, as Dave said, I'm a senior UX researcher for Workday. I've been at Workday for about 3.5 years. It's the longest I've spent now in an organization. So I really love it here. And we may, I don't know, David, we may get a bit more into backgroundy stuff. I don't know, but that's kind of the gist of it. I had an academic background. I was in CIT or MTU as it is now for a number of years. It's where I did my PhD, and basically when I finished, I just kind of wanted to get out of it. I'd been there between my undergrad and postgrads. I was there for 10 years, so yeah, I just kind of got out into the big bad world. I basically discovered UX by accident, and this is where I still am now 7 years later. So yeah, I'm looking forward to a bit of chat. So yeah.
So can everybody, are people asking questions?
Sorry, David, I thought I saw you speaking there, but you were muted, so I don't know.
Can anybody ask questions?
Seems like to chat, isn't it?
Okay. I thought it wasn't working there.
Cool. Yeah. So I suppose Sarah and Christina's questions are, I suppose I can kind of answer the two in one really. And this is something I've observed with like peers my own age. I mean, I'm 35 now, and a lot of my peers my age, like we didn't study UX because there wasn't really UX to study. Like when I did my leaving cert in 2004, I was coming into college, like really just I'd never heard, I don't know how many people have heard of UX in 2004. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do actually when I finished. So I went into business feeling like it was a good kind of catch-all. So if I can kind of figure it out, and business kind of gives you avenues into different things. And it was kind of a general business degree, and then in third year you have to major in something, and I majored in marketing. In marketing, I had to do a couple of research-related modules, so marketing research and consumer behavior. and I absolutely loved them. And then I just went on to do first a master's and then a PhD. My PhD, to answer Christina's question, was on augmented reality. Not in a kind of computer science way, like I'm not that clever, unfortunately, but more it was more like a sociology based thing. It was really about kind of making a predictive framework for how augmented reality was going to take hold in society, and there was some marketing. There was a marketing aspect to it as well. And basically what happened was I tried to get a job in augmented reality, and I was like, okay, I want to do something that's something marketing, advertising, but like is in the field of augmented reality. And jobs were not very many, as you can imagine. But I ended up getting a job in a augmented reality startup in London called Flipper. And this is where like the accidental UX thing came in. So I had no intentions of like research as a career. So the job I was going for was more creative and advertising. And when in the middle of the interview process, they were like, actually, we've got this new job that hasn't been posted yet. We think you'd be great for it because of your research background. And I was like, oh yeah, research background. And they ended up hiring me for that one instead. And they basically needed someone who could do research. So like the fact that I knew anything about augmented reality was completely incidental. And that's where I just started doing research in a product environment, and that's when I discovered the term UX for the first time. So yeah.
Just Sarah's saying, Sarah, to piggyback on Stephen's question.
Just a follow-up from Christina. So PhD training in social psychology, almost exclusively quant. However, reading about UXR and job ads sounds like qualitative research skills are emphasized. How much do you think quantitative versus qualitative research skills are valued and used day to day in UXR spaces? Okay, since that's less of a follow-up to the last one, I'll kind of go. I'll back a bit. That's a great question, though.
Yeah. Sarah has to piggyback on the last question. I'm thinking. Yeah.
So Sarah, to piggyback on Steph's question. Oh yeah. So Steph has is psychology good background, get into UX research. And Sarah, I'm thinking of going back to do organizational psychology, as it seems would be beneficial for UX research. What are your thoughts? I would say psychology is absolutely a great background to have. It's something I wish I had, to be honest. I'm really lucky to be in a big company now. We have a very mature research organization. There are somewhere in the region of 50 UX researchers at Workday. So I get the benefit of like working with a lot of really experienced people, and when I look at the people who are like more senior than I am, the people who really like this is really their craft. A lot of them have psychology backgrounds of some sort, and even things like there's psychology is great. I think things like, and this is kind of branching away from psychology, I suppose, but like things like ethnography and things like that, which are they might seem more academic, but actually there's like really parallels between them. So like ethnography is a direct translation to a method we call contextual inquiry, where you're just kind of sitting and watching people do their job, and it's fascinating. It's one of the most kind of rewarding types of research you can do. I would say, and that's not psychology, but like it's kind of tangential. But all those academic fields, I think, are great. And I've even observed a little bit like certain psychology courses bringing in. So there's two people I know who did psychology, but both of those, I think, different courses had like a psychology as it is applied to human-computer interaction. So you might find something that has like a module on UX or something like that.
Can I just ask you about the ethnography part of it?
Mm-hmm.
And do you do a lot of that in like sitting with people for a good amount of time, or how is it done?
We did more of it before the pandemic. I can tell you that much, as you might imagine. Now, I mean, digital ethnography is a thing. It's not not something I've really had the pleasure of doing yet. But yeah, I did it more before the pandemic, and yeah, it's super rewarding. There was a customer we had just went down there for the day, and like it was really cool. We kind of observed, like, we took turns basically shadowing like a couple of employees, and some of them were quite conscious of you, and like it ended up being more like an interview because they were like really keen to talk and they were chatty, which is not really the point. But then there was a couple of others that like forgot you were there, and like that's where the richness is, and you just kind of watch them, observe them, and it was amazing. Yeah.
And then you take notes, and do you interview them, like record them?
So we didn't do any kind of formal interview, but what we did was we would kind of watch them, and like we would try not to interrupt them too much, but like if they did something, it's kind of a balance. Like you don't want to keep like, oh, what did you do there? Because like that disrupts their flow, and then you're not getting the natural, you're not getting them the whole point, the whole reason you're there is to kind of see them in their environment. So you have to be very careful with how much you interject. But then it was, if something like mind-blowing happened, you might say, hey, can you run me through what you did there? Or else you would kind of just take notes, and then maybe at certain intervals say, so I want to chat to you about a few things there. Photographs are great as well. So like we took a lot of photographs because people's workspaces and everything. So like this didn't happen necessarily, but like if you see someone's workspace and they've got 15 post-it notes stuck to their monitor, you might start to wonder, okay, I wonder how like our software might help with that, so yeah.
Lots of printouts, reams of printouts, and exactly. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, get back to the questions. Let's see. So there's a few earlier ones. Academia is very self-directed in terms of work and research questions. How's Workday in that regard? Do you get directed research problems and develop your own solutions?
Mm-hmm.
From done?
There's a great there's a great mix at Workday with that. So self-directed in terms of work and research questions. So there are occasions when like there's the product team, so like the product manager. So like a product manager typically might come to you or kind of come to the the research team and say, we want to investigate this problem. Sometimes it's very straightforward, or like, we've got something in the works, we want you to put it in front of people and see if it works and what have you. Sometimes they come to you and they know something is up there, they can't even really articulate it. So sometimes it is like taking people's like problems and then operationalizing that into some sort of research plan. So in those cases, it's you still kind of come up with your own research questions based on your understanding of like what other people are experiencing. But sometimes they'll be very direct. Look, can you answer this one? Sometimes there's like, very often with non-researchers who want you to do research, there's a translation layer. Say, okay, can you back up a minute? Can we just talk a bit more about what it is you're trying to find? Because they'll sometimes come to you with like, hey, can you do a survey or something, even when survey would be completely inappropriate to the problem they're having. So there is that side, but then there's another side as well, which is like, we, as I say, like we're a very large organization, so with very, very senior researchers who their headspace is more in like strategic work, and I've been lucky enough that I've been able to do a bit of that, where it's like really fuzzy kind of problem space where like there isn't, that there aren't any research questions. There's only like a vague problem that you're trying to work on, so you have to kind of come up with those and kind of come up with research questions and then get that all the way to a research design and so on.
You deal with the ambiguity,
Yeah, and it's one of, I think it's one of the, probably if you had to kind of like say like what's the difference between junior and senior researchers, it's like having to get comfortable in that ambiguity is probably in the top 3, I'd say.
Great. Okay. Let's see now. So, Christina, my PhD training is in social psychology. This is the one you said earlier.
Yeah.
So. How much do you think quantitative versus qualitative research skills are valued and used day to day in UX spaces?
Yeah. So this is so interesting because I've had very mixed experiences. So before Workday, I was in a company called Car Trawler. Some of you might have heard of it. They're an Irish company. They're another great company. I had a great two and a half years there. But the interesting thing about it was that, so for anyone who doesn't know, like Car Trawler, they basically, they're a tech company. They have like a white label solution. White label basically means it's plugged into other companies' software, so you don't see Car Trawler branding anywhere. And it is a car rental software basically. So if you've ever, they partner with airlines and hotels and stuff. So if you've ever rented a car from Ryanair as you were booking your flight, or Aer Lingus, then you've used Car Trawler's technology. So that was my technology. And Car Trawler, it was B2B in the sense that all the partners were airlines and hotels and so on, but it was B2C in business to consumer, in the sense that it was like everyday people using the product. So it was quite transactional, right? So you come on, you rent the car, you might come back to that in 2 years' time or a year's time for your next holiday. It's not Instagram. You're not coming back to it all the time, and you're not engaging with it. It's not an enterprise software where you're using it for your work day to day. Very, very transactional. And what that lended itself to was a kind of focus on quantitative, specifically kind of conversion. So people really cared. The main thing was, like, not trying to build a relationship with these people. You're trying to get them from browsing cars to hitting that, confirm button. And in that company, so quantitative was king, absolutely king. And it was tough at times to get buy-in to do qualitative, because there wasn't a lot of like maturity with regards to like qualitative research. And then I went to Workday, and it was kind of the opposite, where for a couple of reasons. One was that it's enterprise software, so the software that we develop, people use day to day. I mean, there are some, like, there's a lot of Workday software, and some of them, like I mentioned the ethnography thing earlier, like people come in, and those were recruiters we were studying. So they come in, and at 9 o'clock they turn on Workday, and they're on Workday until they leave at 5 p.m. So there was much more emphasis on qualitative in that regard. In the early days, I thought there was maybe too much. It was like feast versus famine. It was like just from one extreme to the other. That was down to technical challenges in a lot of cases, because Workday really prides itself on being very careful with customer data. So like, we don't do a ton of like looking under the hood and seeing what people are doing. Like, we're really, really careful with how we use customers' data. That created a problem for UX, because like, well, okay, we can't see enough to kind of get good insights. That's changing, thankfully. Like, we've come leaps and bounds in the 3.5 years I've been there, so we're kind of doing things carefully, and so it's getting there. So I would say it's quite dependent, and then like it might also depend on, like, I suppose in a lot of companies you might have like a dedicated quantitative team. So in Workday we have like we now have a full like data and analytics team, where I've actually been for most of last year. I've kind of moved around a bit more Workday. So it sits within the research org, so to speak. But like they are like they're data scientists who kind of do their trade. So I would say that being mixed methods, having a mixed methods skill set. So like, if you're qualitative, but you can kind of speak the lingo, you can do quant. I think that's hugely benefit. That would be really kind of it would be a good string to your bow if you're kind of, I think, trying to get work.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. Kevin has a question. What area of UX do you enjoy the most, and what do you find most challenging?
Good question. What I enjoy the most is being knee deep in data. When I say, in this case, I mean like qualitative data. So like I kind of come in and like rub my hands with glee if I've just come off like 10 interviews and there's like 40 pages of transcript to get through. Like for me, that's the richness for me, and that's the thing I love doing the most. The thing I enjoy, the thing I've not enjoyed the least, but find most challenging. I think relationships can be quite difficult. You know, when I moved from academia to UX, I kind of touched on this earlier, like a lot of the technical side is the exact same, like surveys are surveys, interviews are interviews. Like it's really, there are some product focused methods that I wouldn't have done in academia, but like everything's the same. The way I analyze words is the exact same. What was completely different was the relationships with other people in the organization. And that was something I'd never experienced before. And, you know, I've been in the game a while now, so I've kind of gotten used to it, but it still can be challenging to this day. And I think, and this is not unique to work, I think this happens in a lot of places, but like you very often kind of bump into people who don't get UX and UX research in particular. Like it's still a relatively new field, and like there have been, like Workday had product managers developing products before there were UX researchers. And I think very often like research can be perceived to be a bit of a blocker on work, because like we tend to tell people to slow down and make sure they understand the problem space and like don't go in too quickly and all this kind of thing. So sometimes you really have to learn to build buy-in, and that can be a very challenging thing.
Okay, I have one question about just on that, about interviewing techniques and how you ask questions. Do you have any kind of guidelines, tips around how you do that?
Yeah, definitely. So I've got a few that I would use, and I'm sure if you Google these, you'd probably find like I kind of learned these in academia. And again, coming back to that thing of like academia is great, you know. The problem with academia, I think, is finding a company to kind of buy into. That was what I got quite lucky with, but I've kind of heard from other people who've found it tough to break in. But I think once you're in like that academic background, is really helpful. So the kind of techniques I learned, I didn't learn in UX, I learned in academia. So one example would be, I mean, a simple one is probing. So I think, and I think there's a question below from Maureen about differentiating entry level from someone at kind of mid-senior level. One thing I've observed with junior researchers, and I've mentored quite a few of them, is that like you get an interview script and there's kind of nerves. So like there's a desire to like get from question 1 to question 10 or whatever and like get it done. And you miss a lot of tricks because you don't stop to ask, okay, why? You know, can you tell me more about that? And then sometimes you have to ask that again in response to their first response. And you can kind of sound like a toddler, like, you know, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Or like, why? And there's a really, and actually this is something that, you know, UX kind of shares with the marketing discipline. I think the marketing discipline was, I think, the first to kind of coin this idea of laddering. And the kind of concept of laddering is basically that when people answer a question, they answer at a real surface level, and like they're not capable of articulating their values and beliefs like right off the bat of the first question. So you have to ask, you know, follow up. You have to ask like why, or can you explain that a bit more? Can you tell me more? And then they'll kind of articulate a bit more, but they still don't get to the sweet spot. And then you say, okay, can you tell me more about that, or like why is that? And then at the third level down, that is when they're articulating at the level of like values and beliefs. So there's a website called UX Matters. I read it from time to time, and they have a great article on laddering. And then another one would be, so there's one, I think I've used the term markers. And that is the idea of like when someone is talking, they'll often say something that is meant as a non sequitur. Like it's not the point that they're making. They say something that seems quite throwaway, and then they keep going with their main point. But actually, like what they said could be significant, and it could be something that's super interesting. And the technique of markers, it comes from the idea of like putting a marker down and saying, okay, I need to come back to this. And it's also like where being a good listener comes in, because you have to be really attentive. You're not waiting for someone to give you the answer that you're waiting to hear. They say something that seems throwaway, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to disrupt them in their flow now, but I'm going to put like a mental marker down here, and then I'm going to bring them back. Maybe it could be a minute later, I'm going to bring them back and like say, you said something about this back here. Can you just tell me a bit more about that? And I would say that's another one.
I hope you're not too critical of my interviewing skills there.
Not at all.
It just reminds me of Alistair Somerville. He's a sensory designer. He always talks about stepping. You step out of the frame, so you ask the question, and you don't give any of yourself. You try and no personal experience. You ask them the question. You get them to reflect on the question. Get them to name the issue themselves, and then step back and just let them talk. So it kind of that sounds like
it's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah, for sure.
So okay, how does a typical workday of yours look like? So I mean, I know you've talked about it, but when you get into the office in the morning, or into your house, what do you do? What's your routine, I suppose?
Sure. Can I just jump back really quickly, because I touched on Maureen's question, but I probably didn't answer it fully in terms of like the leveling, what differentiates an entry level. So like that, I suppose that is one like kind of just technique. The other one, I touched on it earlier, but like the those relationships with people. So influence is a big thing. So if you're kind of a junior to mid, and you're looking for like a skill to invest in, I would say, maybe take a pause from the technical stuff and like start looking at things like influence and leadership, because that really is kind of, it's funny. Like, I mean, Kevin asked like, what do I like doing the most, and what do I find doing what do I find most challenging? And I said like the technical stuff is what I love. Like that's my bread and butter, and the more kind of relationships, the influence is like what I find more challenging. But as you get more senior, you have to step away from the technical stuff quite a bit, and you have to spend your time on like the relationship stuff. So I haven't like talked to a user in about 6 months, because I've just been like working on strategic problems that involve like a lot of just thinking, how are we going to design this study and so on. So I think that's probably the other big one.
Great.
So then to jump back to
Isabel, yeah.
A typical workday. So I would say I do. So I have. I mean, there's a cliche answer, which is like no day is ever the same, and there is a lot of variability in UX research, because like how you spend your time is very dependent on like the phase of research. And I think when I talked last year at this, it was kind of like going through like the double diamond, which is the framework we use to kind of think about our approach to UX. And I kind of talked through some of the activities at each phase, and like they're all very, very different. So you might be just heads down planning something on a Google Doc for a week, and then you might be spending your time trying to recruit people. You might then be conducting studies and talking to people one after another, and then you're into analysis, and then you have to start working on a presentation. And so like there is like the sort of variability is great. So from that perspective, the kind of like the cliche like no 2 days are the same kind of holds true. But I do actually try to keep a fairly consistent routine going. And I mean, I'm lucky enough to be working from home. I was saying to David before the call that I worked from home pre-pandemic, not by too long, but just by a few months. So I kind of made the choice to do this. Some of my colleagues love it, some of them really do not like it, and they're so happy now that they can get back into the office. But yeah, I just come upstairs with a coffee. Typically, I have to spend the first maybe 45 minutes on Slack, because another thing I was explaining to David is that on my team at the moment, like, I'm the only person in Ireland working on this team. Everyone else is on the west coast of the US. So like, there's so much conversation that happens after hours for me that I have to kind of catch up on it, emails and stuff like that. Probably the most valuable answer I could give to this is talk about like how I manage my calendar. Actually, sorry, before I get to that, what I would say is, like, it's for me, Jen, because I'm the only person on Irish time, like, it's lovely and quiet up until 4 p.m. So if you're looking at companies and you're thinking, oh, maybe I'll work for like a tech company in Silicon Valley, just be aware that at 4 p.m. that's when your day is going to explode. Okay. And then like, it's super busy. I'm lucky that Workday really means it when they say, work-life balance. So there's very rarely pressure to stay on past 6 p.m. And if I do, I compensate for it earlier in the day, like I take a 2-hour lunch or something. But yeah, that's probably the one thing. But then, in terms of the one thing I would probably say in terms of like something that might be valuable is just I be very intentional about my calendar. Like, I create blocks of time where I'm just blocked out. Like, it's nothing special, but and they can be quite themed. So like, some of it might be for heads down work when I just don't want to be interrupted. I turn off Slack and so on. But then I create other ones that are shorter that kind of remind me to do stuff that I might just forget to do in a busy week. Like, just go read stuff. Like, just go look at Medium, or like, I try to keep a backlog of articles and stuff that I can just pull when I'm having a coffee. So, or I might use that 20 minutes or half hour to read a book. Like, there's usually some UX adjacent book I have on the go. So yeah, I think kind of using a calendar as intentionally as possible.
Great, thanks. So a few great questions here now. So do you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert? Classic.
Introvert, 100%. Yeah, it is. It's a super interesting question. And in fact, has anyone heard like the 16 personalities, the Myers-Briggs personality types? I can't remember the exact code now, but it's the introvert, one of those subtypes. So yeah, very much, and it can be really exhausting. How to recharge after interacting with users, team stakeholders. So I would say the answer to that is this. I am obsessed with Lego. And yeah, like, I literally build Lego during my day as well. If I'm thinking about a problem, it's like, okay, I could be staring at my screen waiting for something to happen, or I can just like spend 10 minutes building something. So yeah, that's a good recharge.
That's good. Yeah.
And then because I think that just kind of ties into the broader point of like just finding bits of joy in your day, especially if you can be burned out, exhausted. I'm trying to do more walks. Walks are tricky for me because I have a 2-year-old, and if she sees me go out, like, she'll go mental and want to come with me. So yeah, I try to just do things like that.
Yeah, it's like Susan Cain, the book Quiet, about introverts and extroverts. Introverts can, they can be very good at faking the extrovert part of themselves, and so I mean, it's kind of, when you're going out interviewing, I suppose that you're doing that. You're kind of coming out of your shell a bit.
Yeah, that's a good point, and you really have to exercise it at times. Like, if you're doing a long series, and you have to bring that same energy to number 10 as you did like number 1. And I would never schedule any interviews back to back, and never more than 2 in a day unless there are some serious restrictions or like really serious deadline. Because it's mentally
draining.
Yeah, it is big time.
Excellent. So another question from Ruth. So what do you include in a research plan? She's always interested in researchers how they take on developing surveys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, a research plan, what would be in a research plan? So I would always give a bit of background. I'm kind of mentally thinking through like my last research plan, so I'd always have a bit of background, not too long. Documentation is super important, and I think context is really important. So like you need a paragraph for, someone stumbles along and says, "Hey, I wonder what this is all about." Like a little bit of background. The research questions as well. So like not to be confused with like the script, like the questions you ask of your participants, but like the research questions. So that's usually kind of 5 or 6 questions that you are hoping to answer in this study, whether that's a survey or an interview or a usability test. Like these are just the questions you will answer by doing this study. I try to do that in collaboration with as many stakeholders as possible. Then I would have this is probably no particular order, I'm just kind of grabbing things as they come to mind, but like a timeline. I would have a good one, something that I've probably done more in the last year or so as I've kind of, I suppose, developed a bit more and back in this relationship, is like some sort of stakeholder framework. So there's one called RACI that we use, which stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consultant, and Informed. And it's basically just telling you, like, it's kind of setting boundaries. So like, I am responsible for delivering this, and it might be that someone else is accountable for the success of the project. And another one is the PAID framework, and that's more of it's kind of similar, but you can kind of use them in conjunction with one another. It's more of a decision making, and it does things like make sure everybody knows who the decision maker is. So like sometimes down the road you can get into circular discussions where 2 people might disagree on an approach or something like that, and you end it by saying, look, this is the decision maker, like, what do you say? And those are probably the main things that come to mind. And that would be, I think that would be agnostic, because I know the question references surveys, but my research plan would kind of be agnostic. Or actually just realized I'm missing a really key component, the methodology. So I'd have like the methodology section, so whether that's an interview or a survey, a little bit about why, and I'd usually link off to a different document that has, like, if it's an interview, like the script, like I wouldn't put that in the research plan. If it's a survey, I wouldn't have like the draft survey in the research plan.
Okay, great. Sorry, what was the second thing you mentioned there? There was RACI and there's
PAID. PAID. So that's a pilot, and there is a little bit of overlap, but PAID is a bit more, the emphasis is more on decision making. So pilot, informed, I can't spell. Pilot, advisor, informed, and decision maker.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, let's see now. Who else? So coming back. So Marina, what do you do to help people understand and cooperate with your work? So I suppose, how do you explain the importance maybe of what you do?
Mm-hmm.
What's your pitch? What's your elevator pitch?
So we'll do Marina, and then I think we jumped over Amira, but we'll back to Amira. In terms of Marina's question, not getting it, what do you do to help people understand and cooperate with work? Unfortunately, there's no shortcut. Like, I think UX is something that it's kind of show don't tell. In other words, like, you really have to show people the value of it rather than tell them about the value of it, because you're saying to someone who might have, and just think about like product managers. Like, product managers, people very often, they're the people in a lot of companies, they might be judged on things like features that they get live, that might be a certain deadline, or there might be a number of features that a company wants a product manager to ship in a given quarter or year. And as I said earlier, like, sometimes you're the person saying slow everything down, So like it can be hard to make a pitch for that. So very often, like what you have to do is like you have to take someone through a cycle of like what it's like to work with UX researcher. So I've really had the whole spectrum in Workday now. I've worked with product managers who used to be product designers and they just get it. I've worked with I've worked with people who've never worked with UX, where they just don't get it, and you have to really bring them along, and it's really about bringing them along more than explaining it. So you have to, and like one of the things, and this came back to earlier when I said, if you're investing in like another skill, make it like influence, because and then some things I do to try and help is like I get them involved. So like research questions, like I kind of make sure that they're involved in setting the research questions. Again, not the script questions, but like the research questions. Like these are the big questions that we're going to answer. I get them involved. I try to get them to observe research as much as possible. This was more effective in pre-pandemic when and I suppose it might get back to it now that we're kind of getting back to the office, but we have like a really like world-class lab in the office in Dublin. So like you get people in and there's like the one-way mirror like you see in the cop shows. You get in and there's great buzz about the place. And yeah, you kind of have to take people through a full cycle, and I think sometimes it's just about you just have to do your best until someone has seen it, and then very often they'll get it. And the last thing I'll say is that a guy called Tomer Sharon has written a brilliant book called It's Our Research. It should be required reading for anyone who's
Tomer Sharon. It's our research.
Yeah, I'm going to pop it in the chat.
Yeah, do.
Like really required reading, I think.
Well, there is another question about can you recommend UX books? What are your top ones? So
yeah,
obviously that.
Okay, yeah. Obviously, yeah. So that one, I would say so. An author called Erica Hall has written a book called Just Enough Research, and it's a good one if you are in a company where there's a lot of pressure on you to do research, and you might be the only researcher on your team, and like you just don't have as much time to do all the research as you can. So that's a good book. Another one then, and this is a great one. So I'm very lucky to actually work with this person. She's in Workday. She's also like an internationally renowned speaker and author, Sam Ladner. I'm very lucky to have. She's mentored me for a while now. And she has a book called Mixed Methods, and it's like quintessential reading on like how to balance qualitative and quantitative, and it's short as well. It's only like 120 pages or something, so it's a good one. Yeah, just thinking, is there anything else? Those are the ones that kind of come to mind.
Brilliant, that's great. So. Go on.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure we didn't skip over Amira's question.
So I would like to ask how to begin UX research, especially when there's nobody to mentor. So how does she start? Yeah.
I think meetups like this are a great starting point. So like more of this. I mean, when I was kind of in that situation, it was different for me because what happened, as I kind of explained earlier, like I was hired by a product company who wanted me to do research. So I was like, you're a UX researcher now and go learn it. So like, it wasn't me trying to break into UX. It was like, oh, I'm working UX, but I've never done UX. So, but maybe some of that would help. Like, and basically it was a case of doing as many on-demand courses as I could, like, basic foundational UX training. If you're trying to break into UX, you may have to do like a portfolio. So I think one of the courses I did had like a portfolio project, so you could kind of do that. You could also do you could invent a research problem for something that you're passionate in. So like, maybe there's a website you go to and you kind of invent like a problem and you do research, and you could like literally do research with people, and you put the website in front of them and that kind of thing. So there's that. Or yeah, something I've also seen is volunteering. Like there are organizations that pair skills with like people who need those skills, like maybe charitable organizations or not-for-profits who don't have like Silicon Valley budgets for research. So maybe things like that, and combined with the books, the meetups. That's probably what I would say.
Well, that kind of leads into Yasara's question: what skill set is important? And you probably covered some of these, but what are the essential skills?
So I would say, so there's technical. So there's technical skills. So can you do an interview? Do you know like what research method is appropriate for what problem? So you wouldn't use something that's quantitative for a qualitative problem and vice versa. The influence thing I mentioned. So again, like a lot of, if you're interviewing for a research role, there's this implied need to be someone who can kind of influence and build relationships and secure buy-in. And, at Workday as well, we call it, being a change agent. So like, you might have to break into a space where like things are, you need to change how things are done, maybe do things in a way that's more beneficial to the end user and not just trying to ship a bunch of features. So there's that. Communication is huge. So that could be anything from like how I'm speaking to you now, to your presentation style, to how you pitch things, that kind of thing. I'm just trying to think back, because I do interviews at Workday quite a bit as well. So I'm just trying to think like.
You obviously have a love of data, of of sifting through, finding patterns.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, big time. Yeah. Absolutely. So and that kind of comes under the technical umbrella for sure. Collaboration, like demonstrating that you can work with people, because you're going to be working with loads of different types of job roles. And I suppose Arlene's question is very similar to that, like in terms of advice for someone interviewing for a user research role. I would say a good portfolio is pretty important, and it depends. Like some companies, like in Workday, we do get people to present a portfolio. Other companies might not do. If you are in that situation where someone is asking you to present like a portfolio, there is, and thankfully I sent this to someone recently, so it should be really close to hand. This great article called "How to